I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Heather Sanford, she, her, serves as the Communications and Advocacy Manager at Outfront Kalamazoo. She also co-facilitates Outfront Kalamazoo's Proud Families program, which serves LGBTQIA+ families with youth ages 0 to 12. And today, Heather is going to speak on leading with love. Heather?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Like was said, my name is Heather. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Communications and Advocacy Manager at Outfront Kalamazoo. And I was invited to speak here today, I understand, as part of a series of sort of guest speakers in response to our current political climate. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I will be speaking today a little bit on religious trauma. So take care of yourself. If it's not too explicit, but take care of yourself as I'm sharing some stories from recent weeks. And thank you for being here with me today. Okay, so last week I received a postcard at work. It was addressed to me directly by name, and it said, "Repent and believe in the gospel." It was signed by Jesus himself. It was also postmarked from Santa Ana, California, which, as we all know, is where Jesus keeps his home office. There was also a postscript that said, "Jesus loves you," but I didn't, of course, believe for a moment that this postcard was a love note. If you subscribe to Outfront's Facebook page, you may have seen that one of our posts had a lot of attention last week. We're having a trans pool party at the YMCA next weekend, and the announcement post somehow made its way into a conservative group. In the blink of an eye, there were hundreds of comments on this post spewing hateful and hurtful rhetoric against the trans community. Many of these comments were directed at the YMCA, pointing out that the C in YMCA stands for Christian, and that it was a disgrace that a Christian organization would let trans people swim in their pool. Now, I don't have to stand up here and tell you that it's not every church. I know that there are congregations and faith leaders in the world and right here in the community, right here, who do not subscribe to the belief that being queer is a sin. But it's also not the norm. And the work of our Faith Alliance, of which this church is a member, is really unique and all the more powerful for that. When Joe extended an invitation for someone from Outfront to speak here today, I was the only member of our leadership team who felt comfortable agreeing to it. Not because we have any reason to believe that we're not safe here in this particular church, but because so many of us have had so much religious trauma that it no longer matters whether the individual church is queer inclusive or not. After enough religious trauma, any church is just uncomfortable at best to be in. When I was originally planning my speech for today, I was thinking about this widespread religious trauma in the queer community. I was going to stand here today and talk about the great work that our Faith Alliance is doing to reclaim some of our faith-based spaces here in Kalamazoo, and the role that we at Outfront would love to see our local faith leaders play in the next 4 years as we navigate an administration that is explicitly targeting our community. But I was talking to a friend of mine last night. This friend grew up in the church and really got to experience the church as a community in a way that I've never personally had the pleasure of experiencing. He helped me realize that I was approaching today's talk from the wrong angle. So I'm not here today to talk to any of the figureheads of your congregation. I'm here to talk to all of you and hopefully inspire you to start some important conversations amongst yourselves that will continue after I've stepped down from this podium. So I'd like to use the bulk of my time today to actually ask you all some questions. I'll give you a few minutes after each question to turn to your neighbor, share some thoughts, and then I would love for a few volunteers to share so that everyone can hear if you feel brave enough and comfortable enough to do so. So I've got 3 different questions. I'll give about 2 or 3 minutes to talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll pause to share, and then I'll go to my next question, okay? So my first question asks you to bear witness to one another. That question is, why is it personally important to you that our community becomes a safer and more inclusive space for queer folks? And if it's not important to you, why do you think that might be? So I'm using my teacher tools here. I'm a teacher. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes to keep us on track. But please turn to your neighbors and reflect on that. Go ahead and wrap up your thoughts, and we'll bring it back together. Awesome. I'd love to hear one or two voices that feel comfortable sharing what you talked about, why this cause is personally important to you.
Well, for me, it's really important because I'm queer.
Yeah, that'll do it.
And so, you know, it's always been a real accepting place, and going back many years, a Unitarian, because it's an accepting place.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I've always considered myself to be a tomboy girl, not a girly girl. So I see that, you know, some men have some effeminate traits sometimes. I think we're all somewhere on the continuum. So
Absolutely.
that's why it's important to me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Do we have anyone else who wants to share? Wonderful.
The consensus in our group was that many of us have family and friends who are of a different persuasion than we are. And it's like, okay, just be who you are and I'll be who I am and we'll work it out.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. So my second question then builds off of that now that we've thought about our personal commitments to the cause and our personal stakes in the cause. My second question invites you to action. My question is, what is one thing that you can personally and realistically commit to make our community a safer and more inclusive space for queer folks? And I really want to challenge you to think outside of the walls of this church, which is already a very inclusive space, And I want to challenge you to think past things like adding your pronouns to your email signature. That's important. But I want to challenge us to think a little further and deeper than that. So think about one thing you can personally and realistically do to make our community a safer and more inclusive space for queer folks. Give it 2 minutes. Go ahead and wrap up your thoughts, and we'll bring it back together. When we're ready, I'd love to hear some shares.
So one thing that I could personally do is continue to donate to Outfront, but more personally, to come down and help out.
Thank you. Yeah, we'd love that. We'd love to have you. Our volunteer form is just on our website if anyone else is interested in that.
You know, there's a message I send to everybody. I know people don't like politics, but it's really important to get involved in the political, candidates, get involved with groups, write letters, all that kind of stuff. That's really important. But I was mentioning to Darby, there was a woman, Christine Jorgensen. How many of you remember her? And she was a charming woman. And actually, I dated a woman that met her, And she was like probably the first trans person, at least publicly, wouldn't you say, that we knew of. And she had to go to Sweden to get the operation. But I don't recall that much pushback against her back then. And this was back in the 60s and 70s. I was telling Darby, man, we're just going backwards. I thought, with the gay marriage, I thought we're beyond that. And I thought we were moving forward. And it's just really troubling that we're moving backwards. But it's really important to get involved politically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'd actually like to speak. My husband and I live way out in the country. We don't live near here. But what we do in our little town of Dowagiac is we have a gay man and his husband run the local bakery. We go there frequently. We're good friends with their parents. And the city government is they did Pride for the first time in our little town. And I think writing letters to make sure they know we support them probably would be something we could do even out in the country.
Absolutely. Mhm. Wonderful. If we have anyone else who would love to share, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we can move to the next question. Awesome. That was all great. Donating, volunteering, getting politically involved, making sure that your vote counts, and lifting up queer businesses and queer families and folks in your community, your next door neighbors or people who live down the street or in the next town over. All of that is really important work. So my final question just brings us to accountability. Now that we've talked about what our stakes are in the cause and what are some tangible, realistic commitments we can make toward the furthering of the cause, how are you going to hold yourself and each other accountable in taking those actions? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? What support do you need from each other to make sure that you're continuing to have forward movement on those commitments that we're making today? How are you going to hold yourself and each other accountable in those action plans? Let's take another 2 minutes. Wrap up your thoughts and we'll bring it back to the group. When we feel ready, I'd love to hear a couple of brave voices sharing their accountability plans. Thank you. I love hearing all of the engagement. I wish I always had that in my classrooms when I asked my students to do these things. Do you have a couple of folks who feel brave to share your accountability plans?
I can share for our group, it wasn't necessarily an accountability plan, but we had a discussion about the listing of your pronouns and what value it brings. And I know for some people that it's really unfamiliar. It's just sort of in your face and irritating and silly. And as Justin suggested, it's a way to kind of normalize the stopping to thinking.
Absolutely.
You know, and realize that. And so I used to have it on my name tag, and I got a new name tag, and I didn't think I'd put it because it's sort of messy. But if I realize when I'm making a statement, when I do that, you know, people that aren't what they look like, perhaps, don't go by that, it's a way to stand up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Remembering your why is, I think, a really good piece of accountability too. When you forget why you were doing something, or you just need to find your feet in it again. Remembering your why, just like that. That's a great example. Anyone else feel comfy sharing?
We all know it's you.
And it's okay if we don't. The accountability piece is probably the most vulnerable. Did you see a hand? Would you like to share? Sure.
Hello, testing. There we go. So, I don't know, maybe this isn't the happiest thing to share, but just a thought I've had kind of related to this, and something that I'm just starting to talk about with some of my friends in my own life, who are somewhere in the general, you know, the non-cis straight area, is that I've, you know, in some ways seen things get better, but also a lot of time in my life as a younger person has kind of just been a disappointing series of watching the United States kind of fracturing and not working well and just continuing to kind of get worse. So, I don't know, my genuine advice to them, and something I'm also following in my own life, is to just be like cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of people out there who don't wish you well, and to, you know, find out who is actually your friend, and to be willing to lean on them for support, but also to like try to work things out in your own life so you have some mobility, so you have flexibility, so that you don't need to feel trapped in one place, just waiting and hoping for things to get better, to you know, to try to get some skills or some knowledge or something that could maybe you could leverage to get somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think you left up an important point about finding your community, finding your people to do this work with, whether you identify within the queer community or whether you are an ally or an accomplice to the work. Finding people to do this with you is a really great way to keep your momentum. It's a lot harder to do this work alone. We'd love to have you out front. The work that y'all do here in this congregation is great work too. The reason that I wanted y'all to talk to each other so much today is because I want you to get that momentum today. And if you didn't know your neighbor well before today, maybe you know them a little better now, and you can build that momentum together. I invite you to build on what you talked about with each other today. And if you're watching at home, I hope that this maybe inspired you to talk to someone around you or near you, or have those conversations soon if you're watching by yourself today. But I think that actually gives me a really great foot to leave this off on, that this work can't happen in isolation. We have to do it together. We're strongest together. And I'm really grateful to have been here, to have been invited here today to get those conversations rolling and build on what you've already talked about as a community, and maybe take you the next step in that direction. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much.